We are in the middle of the Mayim Basi Legani, Tafshin Chaf, 1960, middle of chapter 4. We are on page Chaf Aleph in the handout, which you can find if you want to follow along in the chat to the right. So we're going to be on the bottom of page Chaf Aleph, the paragraph on the bottom of the page, V'yuvan b'toisves bir. What we said till now, the Maimer, we're now in the second half of the Maimer. And in the first part, we talked about the avodah of a Jew, that through a divine service of a Jew, he draws Seivev Ha'amiti, draws the essence of God into all worlds. The glory of God, the light of God is manifest in all worlds. And we said in all worlds equally. And in addition, we said we have the idea of Mamala Kalam, and that through the divine service of a Jew, all worlds receive and are impacted in their own unique way. So we have these two things of Seiviv and Mamala, that through our divine service, making a home for God in this world, we draw Mamala Kalaman and Seiviv Kalaman, the immanent energy of the divine as well as the transcendent. In the second half now, we turn to the idea of Tzivos Hashem. And so in chapter 4, we quoted the second part of the previous Rebbe's chapter 10 in his Maimer, where he introduces the idea that once he explains that through our service we draw Seiviv and Mamala, that's why the Jewish people are called Tzivos Hashem. Tzivos Hashem, the hosts of God, the troops of God. And but once he introduces that and introduces it with several verses, he then asks a question: why would the Jewish people be called Tzivos Hashem at the time of the Exodus of Egypt? So the Rebbe in chapter 4 here explains this question. What exactly is the question? What's the problem with people being? You call them whatever. So he explains that Tzivos Hashem means that he brings from the Alter Rebbe that the name Tzvos, which is one of God's names, is a name that only appears later during the era of the prophets. Why does it appear later at the era of the prophets? Because at that time the divine service was on a lower level than in previous generations. And specifically, he says in the time of Moses, who was a soul of Atzilus, and Moses, whose people, his generation, were on par, were on the same level in a sense as Moses. Moses had them on his level. So that is a divine service that would fit with the world of Atzilus. The world of Atzilus, as we know, as we discussed in last class at length, God is one with his light, with the vessels, as we discussed in the last class. But meaning all there is the divine, is oneness. God identifies, in a sense, with his names, that even though the names are something external, nevertheless, the names are almost sort of transparent in that what is felt there is God, not something else. Whereas when we talk about the worlds of Biyah, the lower worlds, the next worlds, where they're already, you can already call it some form of existence, even to the extent of seemingly independent existence. That's where the name Tzvos comes. So the name Tzvos, as we explained, comes from the term Oishu B'Tzavadile, that God is outstanding among his hosts. So what does that mean? That here we're talking about a place where there are hosts, there are a lot of other creations, a lot of other things, and God is outstanding, or is the master of, or in charge of all of these creations. In Atzilus, you can't call him Tzvos because there is nothing. It's just him. It's all him. Whereas in the lower levels, that's what you have. So the question based on the Alter Rebbe is, first we said, the name Tzvos doesn't appear till later. And the Jewish people are called by the name that expresses their divine service. But from the Alter Rebbe, it would emerge from his explanation of the name Tzvos that the divine service of the Jewish people at the time was not on the level of Tzvos. There was a much higher one of total oneness with God. And so therefore, what would be the purpose of the service as it is expressed in the concept of Tzvos? So that was the question. But the Rebbe continues and adds another layer to the question based on a teaching of the Mittler Rebbe. So let's continue here. Chaf Aleph, we're on page Chaf Aleph here, towards the bottom, in the paragraph begins V'yuvan b'toisves bir. He says like this: V'yuvan b'toisves bir al pi ma shemevar ba'arucha koit kedush admura hamtzoi b'dibra maskal zeh. We can understand this with greater understanding into this question. Again, we're all in this question that Friedrich Rebbe asks, which he asks really with just one line in chapter 10 of his Maimer, This is a further understanding this question. So he says we can understand based on something that the Mittler explains at length in his Maimer by this title. Shachiluk bein shem tzvois l'shara shemois hu al derech hachiluk bein shem ha'po'ula shem ha'kinoi l'shem ha'torah v'ad l'shem ha'etzem. That the difference between the name tzvois and the other divine names, as we discussed in the last class, that there are the 7 holy names of God that are not erased. Tzvois is one of them, but there's a fundamental difference between tzvois and the other names. And he compares it to the difference between Shem HaPa'ula, which is an describing an action, or Shem HaKinoi, a nickname. Here he uses these sort of interchangeably. L'Shem HaToyar, to a description, a title, V'ad L'Shem Etzem, to a definition. So basically, you have like this. You have a Shema Etzem, which, well, to simplify it, you have a noun. A noun is, obviously, these concepts in Hebrew work better than in English, because in Hebrew, when we say a name of something, the name expresses the essence of something, whereas in other languages, the names are really just sort of describe characteristics of it. They don't cut to the essence of it. But notwithstanding, just for clarity's sake, you have a noun, which is a description of or identification of a thing itself. Then you have an adjective, which describes the thing, which describes the noun. And then you have a verb. So the verb is the action, what this thing is doing. So that's the Shema Etzem would be, we'll call it a noun. Shema Torah, we'll call that an adjective. And the Shema Pa'ul or Shema Kino, either the action or the nickname, we'll call that the verb. So he says like this. In brief, he says like this. Shema Etzem, what is Shema Etzem? What we'll call a noun. That is like a wise person. He is essentially wise. He has wisdom within him. What does this mean that he's wise? It means that in his soul he has an essence of infinite, immeasurable wisdom. So that is a person who is a chacham. We call him a wise person. He's called a wise person. There are 2 components to him being a wise person. One is that there is wisdom within him. Shem HaToyar, and what's the Shem HaToyar? The adjective, that would be that his spiritual vessels, meaning the vessels through which the wisdom is manifest in the person himself. Because that the vessels, meaning the place that retains, that absorbs, and that channels the light of this this potential of wisdom. So him kelim rechavim b'yosar, they're very, very big, meaning that they have great capacity. It's for this reason that the person is called a chacham, a wise person, because sheyachal lekabel chachma ad bli shir, he's able to absorb and to understand, to grasp an infinite amount of wisdom. So in other words, when we say somebody is a wise person, it's 2 parts. There's his ability, his mental capacity that can handle wisdom, and then there's the wisdom that's in that mental capacity. So those are the 2 things: the capacity to be able to absorb the wisdom and to process the wisdom, to understand the wisdom. Those are his kalim, as it were, the vessels that absorb that wisdom that kind of comes from outside of him. That's an adjective that describes the person. And the wisdom that flows into it, that's the Shem Etzem. That would be, we're calling here the noun. So there's those 2 parts. There's the wisdom itself, and then there's the capacity the person has to be able to process that wisdom. We can understand the verse that says that God grants wisdom to the wise. What is the meaning of these words, of this verse? If they're wise, so what does it mean that if he's wise? So obviously he has wisdom. What does it mean that he gives wisdom to the wise? The explanation is the chakimin hushem hatoyar. When we call somebody a chacham, a wise person, that is an adjective. That's a description of the person's mind and his mental capacity that he can be able to process, to comprehend deep wisdom. And so when a person has that mental capacity, he has the cup, he has the head for it. then he's granted that wisdom. He's granted the wisdom from the essence, the essential power, the potential for chachma, for wisdom, and he becomes completely one with this source of wisdom, from which flows an unrestrained amount of wisdom. So the point is that a wise person is somebody who has the mental capacity to understand and to receive and to process an infinite amount of wisdom, and then there's that infinite wisdom that is now becomes part of him. So the person becomes completely identified with that wisdom. And this two-step process. So in addition to this, the fact that the person is a wise person, which when you say somebody is wise, it means that he has both the mental capacity and the wisdom itself all together, united, as completely unified together. In addition to that, you also have the nickname or the verb of wise. This is the effect that the wisdom has in action. Hainu, meaning that this wisdom is now revealed, is now manifest, to the extent that it can come outside of the person. What does this mean? It means revealing it to somebody else. But when we talk about revealing the wisdom to somebody else, to the extent, not just revealing it even internally to the person, to his own self, but revealing it outside to somebody else, here it is already limited and restrained. So you have a wise person is somebody who has the mental capacity for the wisdom and has that wisdom in his faculties of his intellectual faculties. And in that space, the greater the wise person, the more of that wisdom he can absorb. But then there's actually imparting that wisdom. Then there's sharing that wisdom. He doesn't really address it in detail here, but there's the step of it, revealing it in a sense to oneself. But just for contrast purpose, we're talking about revealing it to somebody else. So when a person, a big scholar, wants to share his wisdom with somebody else, he needs to confine it, he needs to limit it, he needs to measure it, and he needs to share a limited amount of that wisdom. You can't impart your infinite knowledge and information all at once. Can't happen. So the person, in order to reveal that wisdom, needs to limit the wisdom. So within his own mind, that is just a boundless reservoir of wisdom that doesn't stop. But then there is focusing it and channeling it. They tell the story about the Rogachover, Rabbi Yosef Rosen, who was a rabbi in Dvinsk in the early 1900s. So he was known as quite a genius, and they say that for him Shabbos was a very difficult time because he had so many ideas flowing through his mind. He would like to commit them to writing. So he'd commit them to writing. The writing would sort of channel it and focus it and anchor it. On Shabbos he couldn't write it, so the ideas were just flowing freely. So it was very overwhelming, it seems, for him. Now, so the idea is you're going to channel it into writing. What you're going to do is you're going to take this non-stop flow of ideas of wisdom, and then you're going to channel. You're going to focus it on something specific. You put it pen to paper. You're going to limit and confine that idea to something. So we see the contrast between the wisdom as it is in the mind versus the wisdom as it then comes out in a lecture, as it comes out in a book, where it's limited and it's confined. So mizem move on. From this we understand so from this we can better understand the greater distance between Shem HaPo'ula, the verb of wisdom, of wise, even as it is in the person himself. That step where it can go from the person has to now define it within himself. He has to confine it and limit it in order to teach it to somebody else. And certainly even more so when we're talking about actually imparting it to somebody else. L'shem ha'toyer v'shem ha'etzem, in contrast to the adjective or the noun of the wise, which are united and completely bound together, as we said before, quoting the verse of imparting wisdom to the wise. The difference is finite versus infinite. This idea, the concept of imparting wisdom to the wise, which, as we said, that would be the noun and the adjective. That's in an infinite amount. A wise person, somebody who truly has a great, deep mental capacity, there's no limit to what he can grasp and understand. But when we're talking about the verb, the revealing it even within himself, and then certainly as he reveals it to somebody else, there it's limited. This is an immeasurable gap between these two parts. So you have three things here. There's the wisdom itself, there's the person's capacity to comprehend the wisdom, and then there is the sharing of that wisdom, either within oneself or preparing to share it with somebody else, and then there's the actually sharing it with somebody else. So there are three parts. The first two are completely united. The wisdom and the wise person, his mental capacity, his mind, and the wisdom within it are completely bound together as one, and there's no limit to the wisdom that's available, and there's no limit to the amount of wisdom that he should be able to understand, to comprehend, and access. The creativity, the potential for that creativity is limitless. But then there is, so on one hand, when we're talking about the person himself and his wisdom, that's infinite. On the other hand, when we're talking about imparting that wisdom, sharing that wisdom, here it's limited. You can't impart all wisdom in one moment. It has to be limited. You have to assess the capacity of the other. It has to be focused, and it has to be measured, it has to be delivered in a comprehensive way. So there's a limitation on the wisdom that can be shared. So when we talk about somebody who's a teacher, who's teaching, so here, that wisdom is limited. Whereas as he is within himself, it's infinite. The gap between the two is immeasurable. It's an infinite gap between these two things. What does this have to do with the name Tzvais? So he says like this. Based on this idea, the difference between the nouns and the adjectives and the verbs, he explains the difference between the 7 divine names that can't be erased, the 7 holy divine names. Sheshem Havaya hu Shem Etzem. The name Havaya is the Shem Etzem, that would be the noun. Why is that? And therefore, V'hu Apnimis shall kol Hashemes, it is the inner dimension of all the names. Shalachim etztarefim kol Hashemes, which is the reason why it actually attaches to all the names of God, like Keil, Elikim, Chulum, Ad L'Shem Tzvais. The name Havaya, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, you find Havaya Elikim. So you see Havaya connects with Elikim, Havaya Adnai connects with Adnai, Havaya Keil, and even Havaya Tzvais. So we see that the name Havaya connects, and so the same is true with all the divine names, that the name Havaya connects with all those names. Why? Because Havaya is the inner dimension of all these names, of all the divine names. Just like the wisdom, as it is absorbed in the keli, in the vessel of the mind. Why is that? Because the name Havaya is Liezu B'chinas Ha'oir. The name Havaya is called the Shem Etzem, the noun, because that is similar to the light. That is the divine light. Whereas the other names are Kalim. They're the vessels. Recall we discussed in the last class this idea of the light and the vessel. So there's the abstract energy, and then there's the energy as it is confined and defined. So it's similar to Chachma, to the idea of Chachma and Chacham, the wisdom and the wise, that the wisdom is an abstract potential for any kind of intelligence, any kind of wisdom. And then there's the wise, the person who then accesses that wisdom and absorbs that wisdom. So that's like the light in the vessel. So the name Havaya, while on the one hand it's a name, but it's the aspect of the light. In other words, it's we touched on it, drop more in the last class, so we're not going to revisit it now, but the point is that it's a name of God on the one hand, which means it has some kind of a definition, but on the other hand, it's the light. It's in a sense more abstract, whereas the other names are focused on, so the name of Havaya is transcendent and beyond. It means it has a specific kind of meaning. It also has it's transcendent, that it's beyond any kind of real definition, whereas the other names of God have very specific meanings and definitions. All the names are like the vessels, the inner part of the vessel, that unifies with the light. Similar to the adjective, which we said, which describes a noun. It connects with the noun. They become one. Whereas the name tzvais is the external part of the vessel. Like the verb. This is as it is, meaning this is how the name or the divine energy is now drawn down in a defined manner, to the extent that it is revealed to somebody outside of itself, to another. Which, relating to what we said in the previous paragraph here in chapter 4 from the Alter Rebbe, that is biyah. So we have a deeper understanding the ramifications when we already learned in the last paragraph from the Alter Rebbe that the name tzvais is in biyah, whereas the other names are in atzilus. Here we have a better comprehension of it. It's not just that we're talking about different levels. From the Alter Rebbe, it would seem, this idea is sort of probably rooted even in the Alter Rebbe, you can infer it, but from the Alter Rebbe, what we're saying is that there's a level of atzilus, and then there's a level of divine service that relates to biyah. In the time of the Exodus of Egypt, the Jewish people were on that level of atzilus. So what are we doing with a name that comes from biyah? It seems out of place. And not only out of place, but as he said, it seems irrelevant. And here we're adding another dimension to it, which is not just that it's a different level, but that there's an infinite gap between them. There's in Atzilus, it's the Shema Etzem and Shema Pa'ula. It is as all of the divine energy is within itself, whereas Shem Tzvais is as it comes out of himself, and therefore it's therefore limited. And that means the Olam is Biyah. As we said before, the contrast between Atzilus and Biyah, Atzilus is all one with God. It's all within God, as it were. And Biyah is, metaphorically speaking, outside otherness. It's as God it relates to something outside of himself, so to speak. And this is why the prophets, we find in the later generations, that the prophets called God by the name Tzvos. Shigam Shom. Because even there, in a place that seems out of the boundaries of godliness, that the purpose was, the function of calling God by the name Tzvos is to bring that oneness into this other place, into Biyah. Whereas in the days of Moshe and in the time of his generation, his people, which at that time the Jewish people had no connection to the worlds of Biyah, meaning they all were, the divine service then was in a manner of Atzilus, not like Biyah, which is otherness, and not one. And based on this immeasurable gap between the name Tzvos and the other names of God, we can better understand, even more so than before, the great question that the previous Rebbe asks in his Maimer, why is that at that time, at the time of the Exodus, when the Jewish people were on this level of Atzilus, of Iyu v'chayu v'gamor yichad, all oneness with God, why is it that at that specific time they're called Tzivos Havaya, when seemingly the name Tzvos is not relevant in that time? Okay. So this is a question that the previous Rebbe asked in his mind, that the Rebbe explains sort of in three steps. Number one, the Jewish people are called, the Jewish people reflect God, and so therefore whatever aspect of God is manifest at any given time, the Jewish people should be called by a name that reflects that energy. In addition, we said that the name Tzvos is in Biyah, whereas the other names are in Atzilus, and at the time of the Exodus of Egypt, Moshe's divine service, and therefore the service for which all his generation, his people were on, was a service that is Atzilus, oneness with God, and Tzvos implies Biyah, a lower level. So it seems out of place to refer to God by the name Tzvos, to refer to the Jewish people with the name Tzvos, when it seems to not be the service of the hour. That doesn't seem to be the way they were serving God. And furthermore, from the Mittel Rebbe, we see that not only was that not the service and seemingly an unnecessary service, but the gap between these two concepts is an infinite gap. It was only when, in a later time, when there seems to be otherness, when they descended to a level of Biyah divine service, where they feel that otherness, that's where the name Tzvos is necessary. Okay, so that's the question that the Friedrich Rebbe asks. And now we're going to continue with the second part, closing part of chapter 10 of the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer. where he answers the question. We'll see how we can answer this great question. So chapter 5. So on this question, the previous Rebbe answers and explains in his Maimer at the end of chapter 10 that the people are called Tzivos Havaya, the hosts of God, the troops of God, the legions of God. And the word Tzivos comes from the word Tzava. What does the word Tzava mean? The word Tzava has three meanings. Aleph, first one is Lashon Chayil, troop or soldier, which the Friedrich Rebbe and the Rebbe subsequently obviously will be explaining in later. Friedrich Rebbe explains this in chapter 11. He doesn't address this definition Chayil at all really in chapter 10. He just announces it. And then chapter 11 is where he turns his attention to this meaning of Tzava, which is soldier, and then of course the Rebbe's Mamorim on that in chapter 11, and also beyond that, explore this idea of Chayil. But that's the first interpretation. Another one, Beis, the second one, Lashon Zman Mugbal, a limited, finite amount of time. Like the pasuk says, the verse says that a person has a set time on this earth, a set time, tzava le'enesh, has a set amount of time here on earth. And Gimel, and the third interpretation of the word tzava is Melashon Tzivyon v'Yaifi. Colors and beauty. Like the Friedrich Rebbe says in his Maimer, Vayichulu Hashemayim, the Haaretz V'chol Tzvam, he quotes that when it says that God created the world, the heaven and earth, and all its hosts, meaning everything in it. So say Chazal, Tziva'am Tzivyoinam, with all their shades, with all their colors, with all the nuance, with all the different shades and colors. So the Friedrich Rebbe gives us these three interpretations of the word tzava: chayil, soldier, and then tzava, a finite amount of time, and then sivyon, colorful and beauty. And then he starts to explain them what they have to do with what we're talking about here. He goes the other way. First, he starts with the definition of tzivyon, of colors, colorful. Then he goes on to tzava as a finite amount of time, and then that'll cover in our chapter, and the Rebbe is going to cover it here in the rest of the Maimer. And then he goes on to discuss Chayil, the first one. And the Rebbe follows the same order, so we're going to start here now with talking about Tzivyon, the colors. So he says like this. Friedrich Rebbe explains in his Maimer the meaning that Tzava comes from the term Tzivyon, colorful, the V'Yaifi, and beauty, as Kefishu ben Neshama Yisrael, as it is regarding the Jewish people, the souls of the Jews. Just as what is the ultimate beauty is something that is made up of many colors and shades. The Gavan Echad, one color is not beautiful. Whereas many colors, many shades and nuance, that's beautiful. What does this mean? What does it mean that when you have many colors? It means what we mean by that is not just when you have a palette of colors in front of you, but when all the colors don't remain isolated and on their own, but when they all come together. So that's when you get something that's colorful. That's where you have beauty. Kain hu Gambi Yisrael Shem Chalukim Madrigasam. Same is true with regard to the Jewish people who are different, where there's a whole palette of different types of Jews. There's Balei Hasaga. They're intellectuals. Shehem Mari Torah. These are the masters of Torah. Mari Razin V'Seidis Eloin, and mystics that are the masters of the secrets and the esoteric part of Torah. Mari the Chuchmasa, great philosophers. And then you have the simple folk that are masters of good deeds. They observe, they fulfill the Torah and the mitzvahs simply. And this is the many colors. The beauty of the Jewish people is how they are made up, comprised of all these different colors. The Rebbe says we can add. So based on what did we say? That what is beautiful? Something that's made up of many colors. And as he said before, one color is not beautiful. But when a bunch of colors come together, now you have beauty. So the Rebbe says, so we're going to add another dimension to this. when we say that if one color is not beautiful, then why do two colors become beautiful? 0 plus 0 still equals 0. So if I have blue and I have green, and blue by itself is not beautiful, we're saying, because it's only one color, and green on its own is not beautiful because it's another color. So suddenly when you bring the two together, now they become beautiful. Where does the beauty come from? If the ingredients are themselves not beautiful. So that's what the Rebbe is going to add here, V'yesh Lahisif. That that when we talk about beauty, you're not just talking about in the general sense, meaning when the two colors come together, or the many colors come together, that's when they're beautiful. But also every individual color itself is also beautiful. This means that the beauty that happens from incorporating all the different colors together, this affects each individual color, and each one itself also becomes beautiful. Sometimes you say that a certain color makes another color pop. So you can have a certain color that you have on the canvas, and then you're going to add a different shade of something else, and suddenly the green that was on the canvas before that seemed dull and lifeless, suddenly it pops, it comes to life. So it's not just that the red that you threw onto the canvas, suddenly the combination, now the two together are suddenly beautiful. No, bring them together, now there's beauty, and not only is there beauty in the coming together of all of them, but allows each color suddenly individually to pop, each color to shine and to reveal its inherent beauty, which is why when you bring colors together, they're beautiful because each individual color has an inherent beauty. It's only that it is expressed, it's revealed by coming together with other colors. So the same we can understand the analog through the inclusion of all the different types of Jewish people together. So that brings about the ultimate beauty in each individual category as well. In whatever unique personal service he's engaged in, whatever path he's on. From the people who know are the knowers of the secrets of the Torah, to the ones that the simple ones who serve God simply. The masters of good deeds. We see here this what we talked about in the first part of the Maimer about Soivev and Mamala. There's transcendence and there's the immanence, and in a sense they're not really compatible. They operate on two different tracks, and yet we said that through divine service, one affects both of them, impacts both of them, draws both Soivev and Mamala. Here, from this concept of Yofi, we see the same idea from the beauty. That on one hand, there's the beauty of everything coming together. What happens when everything comes together? That transcends. So we're all unique and different. And therefore, there's nothing special about every unique individual. When we come together, suddenly now we're saying now there's beauty. In other words, you have to sort of get out of your own specific path, beyond just yourself. That the beauty is the sum total together, not the individual parts. But how they all come together. If that were the case, that would be similar to the avodah that when a person serves God, he draws the transcendent level, where everything it affects everything equally. Because when we're talking about transcendence, the individual level, the individual worlds, the individual places don't matter; they're insignificant. It's everywhere equally. But then when we say that yofi, the idea of that hiskalos, of that bringing them together, not only is it that they're beautiful as a unit together, but that also brings out their individual beauty. This is similar to what we were talking about before, that through the divine service, we also affect mamala, that we impact every individual level, every place in its own unique way. So this is the idea of tzivyon and yofi, the third interpretation of the word tzava in tzivos. Why the Jewish people are called tzivos savaya, because of beauty, that when they come together, when they unite, when every single Jew, regardless of where he's at and what journey he's on, what path he's on, and what category he fits into, what label he ascribes to himself, they unite, they come together, that brings about beauty. And as we see that this relates to what we talked about before as well. But we're still working towards answering the question here about why they're called Tzivos Havaya. But Mamshech about Maimer, the previous Rebbe continues in chapter 10, and he explains that Pirush, that Tzava Shuhag Balo, explains that Tzava also comes from the meaning limited time and limitation. It's like the pasuk that says, Yamim Yitzaru, you created days, v'lo echad. So the verse in Tehillim, and we're gonna explore it a little bit more in depth as we move on here. Pasuk in Tehillim basically is saying that God knew. David HaMelech says that God knew me before I was born, in a sense, and he says God knew all of the days, all future days. He knows what they are, what's going to happen, how they're going to be, how they're going to turn out. They're like, and not one of them is. In other words, not one of them has happened yet. He knows it before it happens. V'loi, the word in Tehillim, v'loi echad b'hem, not one of them. So it's written in the Tehillim. You have a concept of kriya and ksiv, writing and pronouncing. So sometimes in the Torah and in Tanakh, you'll find a word that's spelled and written one way, and it's pronounced another way. The word loi, there are two definitions depending on how it's spelled. There's loi with an aleph, lamed aleph, that means no or not. Then there's loi with a vav, lamed vav, and that means to him. Two very different words. There's a few places in Tehillim as well. This is not the only place where you have the word loi, which is spelled one way, but pronounced, even though it sounds the same, pronounced another way. So the written is one way, and the pronunciation, the meaning in the pronounced way is different. So v'loi echad behem, so on the written v'loi echad behem means that God creates all of these days. V'loi echad behem, none of them have even played out yet. He knows already all these days. He knows what's going to happen without them playing out. V'loi echad behem, not one has played out. But then there's another way, which is the way it's read, v'loi echad behem, and to him there's one, which as the Medrash Rashi comments on the pasuk and gives two interpretations. What does it mean? That from all he creates all these different days, and to him there's one of them. He chose one of them. What day did he choose? So either Shabbos or Yom Kippur, whichever medrash you want to go with. But the point is that he chooses one. So there's Yom. But the point is here, Yamim Yitzaru. God creates these many days. V'loi echad, and either not one is played out yet, and he knows all these days, or v'loi echad, and he has one of them. We're going to now translate this. The Chassidic interpretation of this pasuk is going to be a whole nother level. We're going to get to soon. So this is the idea that tzavas means a set time. Like the pasuk says, Yamim Yutzaru, that he created days. V'lo echad, there's one, meaning that's a defined time. The tzava le'enesh al ha'aretz, as we quoted, tzava le'enesh al ha'aretz, there's a set time for man on earth. The l'chol adam harei yesh le'zman kavua Yamim Yutzaru. Every person has a set time of days that God had already fashioned for him. And when he fills his days, he completes his days through elevating, transforming by breaking the unholy and by transforming it. Then he is now drafted into this group of Tzivos Hashem, the club of Tzivos Havaya, the hosts of Hashem. Okay, Tzarech Lahavin. We have to understand what is the meaning of Yamim Mitzaru, that he created a set time, set amount of days. Meaning that, as we said, Yamim Mitzaru, that a person has to fill all his days in his life. So we have to understand, what does it mean that a person has to fill his days? Which means the garments of Torah mitzvahs that a person does every single day. The refining of the world comes through Torah mitzvahs, through studying Torah and performing mitzvahs. Why then does it have to be that all your days are filled with Torah mitzvahs? To the point that if you're missing one day, so you're missing one garment. Which is, as we said, the Yom Yitzhar, that he created these days that they all have to be filled. And through filling all your days, every single one of those days, doing what we have to do, through that we get to v'lo yachad behem. So you're already giving us a taste of what the translations, what the understanding of the verse is. Yamim Yutzaru, he created many days, you have to fill these days, and when you fill these days, then you arrive at v'lo yachad. To him, there's one. What that means, we'll get to later. Get a little comment. So But we'll leave here with we'll conclude here now with this question. We explained here that tzava is tzivyon, is beauty. That is when many colors come together. So we've explored that. Then we now turn our attention to the next part, the next interpretation of the word tzvos, which is tzava as a set time, and we establish that a person has to fill his days. So the Rebbe asks if there's an objective. If you have a project that's due, so what matters is that the project is completed. How you do it and the method through which you get is irrelevant. The main thing is getting the project done. So if we're all engaged in this divine project, the godly project of making the world a home for God, so we should really be concerned about is the results. How do we get to the results? Through studying Torah and doing mitzvahs. So if a person does his quota of Torah and mitzvahs in one day, and then he has some extra time, he doesn't maybe do double duty. So can he take the next day off? We say no. Every day, call every day you have to do your job. Every single day. In other words, every day has to be full of Torah mitzvahs. It's not just a results-oriented concept, but the process itself is relevant. That every day needs to be filled with Torah mitzvahs. Why? We'll explain, God willing, in the next class from the Tzemach Tzedek.